What happens when a duchess walks in a Bravo studio, thinking she can charm her way through another polished interview, only to find herself up against a host who refuses to play along? Tonight, Meghan Markle thought she was in control, but Andy Cohen had other plans. What began as a friendly late-night chat would soon unravel into one of the most combative interviews in television history. The lights of the Watch What Happens Live set shimmered against the glossy background as Andy Cohen shuffled his note cards. The energy in the room was lively but edged with curiosity, the kind of atmosphere that suggested something unpredictable was about to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, Andy announced with his trademark grin, "Tonight, we have a very special guest. She's been making headlines around the world, and now she's here at Bravo. Please welcome the Duchess of Sussex herself, Meghan Markle." The studio audience applauded politely, though not with the thunderous excitement that usually accompanied Bravo's A-list guests. Meghan walked onto the set, dressed in a black colored tailored blazer and sleek trousers. Her posture was impeccable, her stride deliberate, her expression already calculated for the cameras. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. "Andy," she said smoothly, shaking his hand before settling into the guest chair. "Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here." Thrilled sounded rehearsed, almost like a line from press kit. Andy noticed, and so did the viewers. Andy leaned back, swirling his trademark cocktail with studied casualness. "So, Meghan, let's start light. How's life in California? You and Harry have been settling in, right?" Meghan's response was immediate and with just the slightest edge. "Life's wonderful. We don't really settle, Andy. We create, we build. That's what we've been doing in California, creating something meaningful instead of just existing." There was a faint chuckle from the audience, though not entirely warm. Andy caught the dismissive undertone, but let it pass. "That's great to hear. And how are you and Harry? I know the tabloids love to speculate." Her smile tightened and her voice took on a sharper quality. "We're perfect. Unlike what the tabloids invent daily, we actually have a strong marriage. So, I'd suggest people stop wasting time obsessing over what they don't understand." The audit shifted slightly. Meghan's tone had been curt defensive. Andy kept his composure, nodding politely. Of course. But, people are curious. That's the price of fame, right?" "Curious is one thing," Meghan replied with a cool laugh. "But let's not pretend curiosity justifies invasion. The public thinks they're entitled to every detail of my life, my marriage, my children. It's absurd." Andy raised an eyebrow, but kept his voice calm. "Fair enough. But since you mentioned it to the public, and your father has been in the press again, making comments about wanting to see his grandchildren, do you think there's any chance for reconciliation there?" For the first time, Meghan's carefully trained smile faltered. Her jaw tightened. "Andy, my father has sold lies to the tabloids for years. He chose publicity over family. He's had countless chances to handle things privately, and he didn't. That chapter is closed." Her words were sharp, clipped, less an answer than a dismissal. The audience murmured. Andy leaned forward slightly, his expression mild, but his voice steady. "So, no possibility of him meeting Archie and Leet." Her eyes flashed. "I don't see why I should reward betrayal. Would you let someone who publicly humiliated you back into your home, Andy?" "Exactly. Let's not play naive." The sudden bite in her words caused the room to still. The temperature seemed to drop. Andy maintained his calm demeanor, refusing to rise to the hostility. "I hear you," he said evenly, "but some would argue that family ties are different, unique, worth preserving. They can argue all they want." Meghan snapped, her tone sharpening again. "They didn't live my life. They didn't live my reality. And frankly, I'm tired of people pretending they understand what it's like to be me." And he took a sip of his drink, his smirk returning ever so slightly. He had spotted it, the crack in her polished armor. Meghan was already on edge, defensive, dismissive, and it was only the beginning. He decided to switch gears just slightly. "Let's talk about royal life, then. When you first joined the family, you described it as overwhelming. Some might say you weren't prepared." Meghan's laugh was low and humorless. "Prepared? Andy? You can't prepare for walking into an institution that's centuries old and completely out of touch. It's archaic and honestly suffocating. I adapted better than anyone could have. Her voice was steady, but the arrogance in her tone wasn't lost on anyone. Andy leaned forward again, voice still smooth. And yet, the British public didn't exactly embrace you. Why do you think that is? Meghan's lips curled into something resembling a smirk. Because I was different. Because I challenged them. Because I wouldn't bow and scrape like they expected. And you know what? That's their problem, not mine. The audience gasped softly. Even Andy tilted his head, intrigued. He had interviewed countless celebrities, but rarely had someone walked onto a set with this much dismissive bravado. As the camera zoomed in on Meghan's perfectly composed but increasingly sharp expression, Andy realized part one of his show had already gone off the rails, and there were still plenty of questions left to ask. The tension was only beginning. The commercial break was short, but it did nothing to cool the tension on set. Meghan adjusted her blazer with brisk, clipped movements, her face stiff as the producers counted down to cameras rolling again. Andy, on the other hand, sipped casually from his cocktail glass, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. "Welcome back to Watch What Happens Live," Andy announced with that signature grin, though his eyes carried a glint of steel. "We're here with Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, and we were just talking about royal life. Let's take this a step further." The camera cut to Meghan, who smiled tightly, her hands clasped in her lap. "Meghan," Andy began, "before the palace, before the Netflix deals, before all of this, you were an actress. Suits made you recognizable. And from there, things changed. Do you ever miss that world? The grind of auditions, the Hollywood hustle." Meghan's reply came quickly, almost dismissively. "I don't miss anything, Andy. I've outgrown it. Acting was a stepping stone, not a destination. What I'm doing now has more impact than playing some paralegal on TV ever could." Her tone was sharp enough to draw a collective inhale from the audience. Andy's brows lifted slightly. "Interesting, because a lot of your fans actually loved you on that show. Some might say it was the foundation that made everything else possible." Meghan gave a short, humorless laugh. "With respect, Andy, my foundation is who I am, not what role I played. If people think I'm defined by a television show, that says more about them than it does about me." The condescension in her words was unmistakable. The audience shifted again, and he didn't flinch. "All right," he continued smoothly. "Let's talk about your marriage then. The public fascination is, well, endless. Harry and Meghan, you two are global brands at this point, but with that comes rumors, strain, distance. Are you and Harry as solid as you say you are?" Her expression hardened. "I'm not sure what kind of question that is. Of course, we're solid. The rumors are noise. We don't listen to noise. Honestly, it's laughable that people think they have any insight into our marriage." Andy leaned forward slightly, voice calm, but pointed. "So, no truth whatsoever to reports that the two of you have been under pressure. That California life, media scrutiny, even your own projects, none of it has created cracks." Meghan's smile returned, but this time it was icy. "Andy, let me put it simply, we are stronger than ever. If people need to invent fairy tales to make themselves feel better about their lives, that's their business. But our reality is love, commitment, and partnership. Full stop." The audience murmured again. Not applause, not cheers, just a low hum of discomfort. Andy let the silence stretch before he moved on. "Let's go back to your time in the UK, he said carefully. "There were, shall we say, mixed feelings among the British public. Some adored you, others were less welcoming. How do you see it now?" Meghan's eyes narrowed, just slightly. "I see it as prejudice, plain and simple. People weren't ready for someone like me to challenge their outdated traditions. They wanted someone docile. That's not me. And yes, some of the hostility was racism. Let's not sugarcoat it." Her words were met with a hush that swept across the studio. Andy's tone remained steady. And yet, some critics argue that it wasn't about race, but about attitude. That the way you carried yourself, the decisions you made created friction. What do you say to that? Meghan's answer was sharp, defensive. "That's exactly what people say when they don't want to admit bias. It's not about race. It's about her attitude. It's a convenient excuse. The truth is, I walked into a centuries-old system, and they didn't know how to handle someone like me. So, they turned me into the problem." Andy's smirk returned, faint but noticeable. But do you think you bear any responsibility at all? Any self-reflection on how your approach might have contributed? Meghan leaned forward, her voice cool but dripping with disdain. Responsibility for being myself? For not bowing low enough? For not smiling at the right moment? Please, if being authentic is a crime, then I'll plead guilty. The audience gasped softly again. Andy swirled his drink, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. He had dealt with divas, politicians, and reality stars. But Meghan's arrogance was beginning to exceed even Bravo's usual drama. Okay, Andy said lightly, though his eyes locked on hers. Last question for this block. You've spoken a lot about leaving royal life for privacy, and yet Netflix, Spotify, best-selling memoirs, interviews with Oprah and beyond. How do you respond to those who call that contradictory? The word landed like a strike. Meghan's hands tightened on the armrest. Her smile flickered, then hardened. Contradictory. No, strategic. We control our story. We share what matters when it matters. That's not hypocrisy. That's survival. Her tone was sharp, cutting, the arrogance impossible to miss. Andy gave a slow nod, setting his glass down. Well, strategic or not, it certainly keeps people talking. The audience shifted again, the tension thick in the air. The Duchess had shown her hand, defensive, smug, and unwilling to concede even the smallest flaw. And Andy Cohen, ever the professional, wasn't done. The storm was still building. The Bravo set shimmered in its usual playful colors, but the atmosphere was anything but lighthearted. Meghan crossed her legs tightly, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression daring Andy to try again. Andy, for his part, leaned casually against his desk, notes in hand, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. All right, Andy began smoothly. Let's talk about one of the most famous interviews of the past decade. Your sit-down with Oprah. Millions watched. The world was transfixed. But since then, some of the claims you made have been, let's say, challenged. Meghan's smile didn't budge, but her jawline tightened. I stand by everything we said in that interview. Every single word. That was my truth, Andy. Your truth, Andy repeated, swirling his glass. It's a phrase you've used a lot. But here's the thing about truth, Meghan. It's usually just truth. Facts, not perspectives. Her eyes narrowed. Are you questioning my honesty? Andy held her gaze. I'm questioning contradictions. For example, you told Oprah you and Harry were married 3 days before the official wedding in a private ceremony. But the Archbishop of Canterbury himself later clarified that wasn't a legal marriage, just an exchange of vows. Do you see how that looks? Misleading. A hush fell over the audience. Meghan leaned forward, her voice sharp. What Harry and I shared privately was sacred. Whether the Church of England calls it legal or not is irrelevant. What mattered was our commitment. Andy nodded, but his smile carried a hint of steel. But you didn't say that to Oprah. You said, quote, we were married before the wedding. Millions of people believed you. When the head of the church corrects you publicly, that's not semantics. That's a problem. Meghan's nostrils flared. You're twisting it. You sound just like the British press, desperate to pick apart my words instead of focusing on the bigger picture of what I endured. Andy raised a brow, but his tone remained calm. Well, let's stick with your words then. In that same interview, you claimed you had your passport and keys taken away, that you were trapped inside the palace. Yet, records show you attended multiple public events, traveled abroad, even vacationed. How's that add up? The studio audience let out a ripple of murmurs. Meghan shifted in her seat, her composure cracking just slightly. Do you understand what it's like to live in a gilded cage? Andy, just because I was allowed to appear in public doesn't mean I was free. Every move was monitored, every step controlled. You wouldn't understand. Andy gave a small laugh, though it was void of humor. Maybe not, but what I do understand is inconsistency. You've painted yourself as both completely powerless and completely in control, depending on which interview you're giving, and people notice that. Meghan's eyes flashed with irritation. People notice what they want to notice. I have nothing to apologize for. I told my story, and I will continue to do so on my terms. If the public can't grasp nuance, that's their problem, not mine. Her dismissive tone sent a ripple of unease through the audience. Andy leaned forward, his voice dropping into something quieter but sharper. So when critics say you've monetized victimhood, the Netflix deal, the Spotify deal, Harry's memoir, are they also just failing to grasp nuance? The temperature in this room plummeted. Meghan's lips pressed into a thin line. That accusation is beneath you, Andy. We've built platforms to amplify voices that have been silenced, to highlight causes that matter. That's not monetizing. That's service. Andy swirled his drink, eyes fixed on her. Service that just happens to come with million-dollar checks, book sales, and glossy PR deals. Quite a coincidence. Meghan's composure cracked further. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. Do you mock every guest who tries to make a difference? Or is it just me? Andy didn't blink. I don't mock anyone. I hold people accountable, especially when they hold themselves up as symbols of authenticity while playing by celebrity rules. The audience deserves the truth, Meghan, not just your truth. The audience audibly gasped. Meghan sat back in her chair, her face flushed, her hands gripping the armrests. For the first time all evening, the mask of polished calm seemed to slip. Maybe, Andy added Cully, it's not the British tabloids or the royal family or even Hollywood that's the problem. Maybe, just maybe it's you. Meghan's eyes widened, her face pale, then quickly flushed with rage. She opened her mouth to respond, but for a moment no words came. The Duchess of Sussex, usually so quick, so controlled, was visibly rattled. Andy took a slow sip from his cocktail, letting the silence stretch, letting the cameras drink in every flicker of emotion on Meghan's face. The audience sat frozen, not daring to move, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a reckoning, and the final act was still to come. When the cameras came back from commercial, Meghan sat rigid in her chair. Her face betrayed the strain of holding herself together, her blazer perfectly straightened, but her eyes burning. Andy shuffled his notes, leaned back in his chair, and smiled, not with warmth, but with the confidence of a man who knew he had his guests cornered. So, Meghan, Andy began, his voice calm, almost conversational. We've talked about your marriage, the Oprah interview, your acting career. Let's talk about perception. A lot of people out there feel you've burned bridges with almost everyone. Your father, your sister, the palace staff, even longtime friends. Why do you think that keeps happening? Meghan's head snapped toward him, her tone sharp. Because people sell lies, Andy. They betray trust for a headline or a payday. It's not me, it's them. Every single time. Andy nodded slowly, swirling the ice in his glass. So, you're saying the common denominator in all of these fractured relationships isn't you? The audience let out a collective, ooh. Meghan's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening. I will not sit here and be psychoanalyzed by someone who profits off gossip. I've spent my life trying to rise above toxic people in toxic institutions. Andy leaned forward now, his voice steady, but with a razor edge. Toxic people, toxic institutions, or anyone who doesn't bend to your narrative. Her face flushed. That's insulting and frankly sexist. Andy set his glass down with deliberate calm. No, Meghan, this isn't sexism. This is accountability. And if you're looking for someone to blame for every broken relationship, every contradiction in your story, maybe it's time to look in the mirror. The studio was dead silent. Meghan's hands gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. Her voice trembled, but with fury rather than fear. You don't know me, Andy. You don't know what I've been through. Andy's smirk faded, replaced by an expression of pure resolve. I don't need to know you personally, Meghan. I just have to look at the pattern. You were a moderately successful actress. You married into the most famous family in the world. And from that moment on, you turned every grievance into a headline, every personal dispute into content. You built a brand not on who you are, but on who you married. The blow landed. Meghan inhaled sharply, her eyes wide. That is absolutely outrageous, she whispered. Andy pressed on, his voice now booming across the studio. You call yourself a duchess, but you have no role in the monarchy. You claim independence, but you live off the privileges that title gave you. You say you want privacy, but you've done more interviews, podcasts, and documentaries than anyone else in that family. Tell me, Meghan, what exactly are you without Harry's last name? Gasps erupted from the audience. Meghan's face crumpled for the first time, the sheen of control evaporating. Tears welled in her eyes as she leaned forward, her voice breaking. How dare you? After everything I've endured, how dare you reduce me to just Andy? Cut her off, his tone slicing through her words. How dare you reduce everyone else, Kate, William the Queen, to villains in your story, so you can play the eternal victim? You weren't pushed out, Meghan. You walked out, and you've been cashing ever since. The camera zoomed in as Meghan's tears began to fall, her face contorted with humiliation and rage. The silence in the studio was suffocating. You're jealous, Andy continued, his voice now lower, more measured, but lethal. Jealous of William and Kate, jealous of the respect they have earned, the love they inspire, the grace they show under the same spotlight you claimed nearly destroyed you. The difference is they chose duty. You chose drama. Meghan shook her head violently at her voice cracking as she tried to speak. That's not true. That's not fair. And he didn't flinch. Fair? Life in the royal family isn't about fair. It's about responsibility. And you turned yours into a brand. A brand built on complaints, contradictions, and cash. The tears were flowing freely now. Meghan pulled out her microphone, fumbling to detach it as her hand shook. The audience sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between host and guest as history unfolded in front of them. This is over, Meghan said finally, her voice shaking with rage and humiliation. I will not sit here and be attacked like this. Andy leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm. No, Meghan, you're not being attacked. You're being exposed. There's a difference. She rose abruptly, tossing the microphone onto the chair with a sharp crack. Her heels clicked against the studio floor as she strode toward the exit, her shoulders rigid. The camera followed her until she disappeared behind the curtain. Andy turned slowly back to the audience and the cameras. His expression was cool, unshaken. Well, he said, voice dripping with finality. I guess that's one way to end an interview. The studio erupted, half in applause, half in stunned murmurs. The audience had just witnessed what would go down as one of the most explosive interviews in late-night history. Andy straightened his notes, glanced at his cocktail, and looked straight into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Meghan Markle. We'll be right back after this. The lights dimmed, the theme music swelled, and the segment ended, but the fallout was only just beginning. But here's the question. Did Andy go too far, or did Meghan finally face the accountability she's been avoiding? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss more dramatic showdowns like this one.